welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade. Today we're going to talk about the rather controversial talk that MJF had with muscle and fitness. So now we're going to skip almost everything that has to do with muscle and fitness and actually focus on the controversial statement, which is that MJF doesn't really care about the past and kind of wants those guys and their fans to move on. But he didn't put it in such nice terms. He put it in a classic MJF way. So how exactly did he put it? Well, in the article he said, quote, "I could give a shit about the older guys. I wish they would all rot in hell and die already. It's our time. Screw them and screw the fans that like them still. I've had a phrase and a saying since I entered this business, talent over tenure. I believe in it wholeheartedly. And if those old dogs don't want to believe, I'll put them out of their misery myself. Just come from the champ, and I'll do it." Well, I thought about this, and I thought, oh, that was kind of spicy. Typical MJF. I think he's about 90% in character, but, there's always that 10% that could possibly be real. That's the one thing I like about MJF. You never really can tell what's a gimmick and what's not. But I understand the sentiment, and I'm not entirely against what he's saying. Case in point, I want to point you guys to something that was very important. I think a focal point in the changing of the business. September 18th, 1994. This was Fall Brawl, 1994. The match, Stunning Steve Austin versus Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Now, you may say, why in the hell is that important to this conversation? Well, the reason being, at the time, Hacksaw Jim Duggan was 40 years old. He was born in 1954, if I remember correctly. So he was 40. His opponent, Stunning Steve Austin, was 29. Stunning Steve Austin was the United States champion, and he was supposed to drop the belt to Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Jim Duggan is making his WCW debut in this match. The match is 35 seconds. 35 seconds, Hacksaw Jim Duggan defeats Stunning Steve Austin. A guy who had gone through wars with Ricky Steamboat and was scheduled to wrestle Ricky Steamboat on this show, but was replaced by Hacksaw Jim Duggan. So it says, when you look at the crowd reaction, when Hacksaw Jim Duggan's name is announced, the crowd goes crazy. When Hacksaw Jim Duggan wins, the crowd goes absolutely bonkers. Everybody loves Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and why wouldn't they? Hacksaw Jim Duggan was a regional star in the business in the early 80s. He spent the mid and late 80s in the WWF, where he became a national superstar, a household name. And here he is, the tail end of his career, 40 years old, beating the young guys in 35 seconds. Now, to be fair, Hacksaw Jim Duggan says that Stunning Steve Austin, I'm sorry about that. A little slip of the tongue there. Steve Austin sandbagged him, and that's why the match was short. In other words, the match was supposed to be longer, but Steve Austin didn't want to do it. He faked an injury to drop the belt in 35 seconds or whatever. That's not really what Steve Austin says. It's a whole controversial thing. But the thing about it is it honestly is a great example of the talent versus tenure conception that MJF is putting out there. That the talent was 100% in Stunning Steve Austin. He was better than Hacksaw Jim Duggan in the ring anyway. Did he have the notoriety, the name? Again, I say this all the time about people. You can't be, a 20-year veteran and be 20 years old. Hacksaw Jim Duggan had built up a lot of equity with people. He built up a lot of love and affection and sympathy and everything. These people were getting Hacksaw Jim Duggan for the first time in WCW. They were incredibly excited. They did not know what they had in Stunning Steve Austin. But it took for WWF to show them what Stunning Steve Austin was doing. And it took that shift. And that's really what I want to get to. Because the new generation era of WWE gets shit on a lot. Because all the stars left or were pushed out, depending on how you want to put it. Roddy Piper, Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, All those guys fluttered on the way to WCW. In 1996, they were all in WCW. But in the WWF, you had literally nobody. You had Bret Hart, you had Shawn Michaels, you had Undertaker. You had the WWF trying to push new guys. And it was the worst time in the business. The WWF lost a ton of money in 94 and 95. Part of it was due to the steroid trial and a lot of the other legal issues that Vince was going through. But a lot of it was also the creative. But it was the losing the names, losing the people who had tenure, building up years and years and years of Hulkamania. And now Hulk Hogan's gone. Randy Savage being that solid, dependable number 2. Now he's gone. Andre the Giant is dead. All right. Hacksaw Jim Duggan is gone. Soon, in 96, Ted DiBiase would be gone. All the guys who had the names. Jake Snake Roberts, gone. Superfly Jimmy Snuka, gone. All of these guys that spent the 80s and the early part of the 90s being the top guys for the WWF, they were now gone. Some of them had fluttered over to WCW. Vince had to start over. He had to start actually trying to make new stars. And people were impatient about it. They said, no, we just going to jump ship to where the stars already are. We'll watch them in WCW. And they did. Until 1997, 1998, that's what they did. The fans made the decision to chase all the old names to WCW and watch them, and left Owen Hart and the British Bulldog and Shawn and all these guys holding the bag. And they did the best that they could. But it took a while before some new guys, Stunning Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Triple H, to actually start getting the ball rolling in the other direction again. It took time. But that's what MJF is talking about here. We're at a breaking point where the fans are not sure whether they want to continue. There's certain older guys they don't want to deal with. Bill Goldberg beating Kevin Owens or The Fiend. They don't want no part of that. They also kind of like Edge, but then they will join Dave Meltzer and his proud gang of morons who say, oh, look at how old Edge is. Look at how old this Royal Rumble match is. So I get it. Sometimes the older guys don't know when to step down. Hogan was one of those guys. But sometimes you have to know when the younger guys are not ready yet. Vince had to learn the hard way. He forced out Hogan and Warrior and all those guys, and they weren't ready. The fans were not ready for them to go. The other guys that he wanted to push were not ready yet. But he left himself with no choice. Right? So it's all about the audience now. We know that the talent can't do too much of anything. The audience have to make a decision. We're the audience. I'm the audience. You're the audience. We have to make the conscious decision that guys like MJF, regardless of not being that old, are talented and deserve a push and deserve an opportunity. Because otherwise, we will get more Goldberg versus Kevin Owens matches. They'll have to pay. And WWF had, this is just to back up a little bit. AEW benefits from that sort of freshness. That idea that there really isn't too many old guys hanging around that's going to change creative on a dime. Jericho was the only one. Jarrett and Sting are in tag teams. They don't matter. But Jericho was the only one, right? Everybody else was all on board with doing something new, bringing a new presentation to the wrestling business. While WWE, it had gotten this sort of reputation for, we got to bring in The Rock. We have to bring in John Cena, call back Batista to win the Royal Rumble. We have to bring all of these old guys in because the old guys are the only ones who know how to draw. While AEW is doing something new and fresh, and they're pushing Hangman Page and MJF and all of this stuff. Sammy Guevara and Cody is getting a fresh opportunity, and all this stuff's happening. That's when the energy and the momentum was with AEW, because people believed that that's what was needed in the business, that people were tired of John Cena and Randy Orton and all these guys. But then they also did the opposite. You started having guys in NXT, guys 36, 37, 38 in NXT. Vince says, let's get rid of all these old guys. Started bringing up the young crock of guys, the Braun Breakers and the Grayson Wallers and the Gigi Dolans and all these people. You had the same people who are complaining about how old the WWF roster is. Well, they're not complaining about how young the NXT roster is. They're all green. None of them know what they're doing. Who the fuck is this guy? It was the same thing. Because people are so worried about age and not that much worried about the talent. The crowd makes the decision. The crowd decides who is going to get pushed and who doesn't. But the crowd can be wrong. In fact, the crowd is mostly wrong. The crowd at Fall Brawl 1994, when they cheered Hacksaw Jim Duggan, part of it was he was a surprise. So let's take that out. A lot of them didn't know he was going to be there. But in the long term, they turned out to be wrong. Hacksaw Jim Duggan was a bad investment. Having Hacksaw Jim Duggan beat Stunning Steve Austin was a bad idea. Forcing Stunning Steve Austin off of the show and replacing him with the older guys from the WWF in the long term ended up being a bad idea. In the short term, it was a great idea. Led to the NWO, led to WCW having Nitro, breaking all of these ratings and pay-per-view buy rates and everything. Hogan came in, Savage came in. It turned out great in the short term. But by 1997, not so much. That would be 3 years later after Hacksaw Jim Duggan beat Stunning Steve Austin. Now, which company is in business and which one isn't? Which one invested in the youth and which one didn't? Now, today, we still have people who are doing the same thing about the Attitude Era. They constantly want the Attitude Era to come back. Constantly with the Ruthless Aggression guys, the Brock Lesnar's and the Cena's and all of those guys. Want those guys to come back. And look, I'm a little bit older than most people. Watching this stuff for a long time, I understand that there's transition periods. And during the transition periods, people are going to slough off. You know, there's not going to be a nice passing of the torch moment where everybody's going to be happy. There's going to be a moment in time where somebody's going to get the torch and you don't like them. So you turn away. Cena was one of that for a lot of people. They weren't really a big fan. So that transition from Attitude Era to sort of mid-modern era, or you could call it Ruthless Aggression era, people were not happy about that. Not a big fan of the brand split and they're 2 world champions now. Wrestling's getting a little weird. Some people are going to flutter away. It's up to the new guys to bring those people back. And sometimes they can do that, sometimes they can't. Sometimes a guy like Cena is transformational and he'll just make new fans. That way he'll make new, don't worry too much about the people who left, because he's creating an entire generation of new fans. And to be quite honest, that's what Stone Cold Steve Austin did. And for a long time, that's what Hulk Hogan did. But it takes that break where somebody's going to get pissed and say, these new dudes are trash. I could do this all day. I could go through some old articles and find people like Ray Stevens, Bruno Sammartino, and Luthez and all of those who hate Hulk Hogan. Hated him. And was open about how much they hated Hulk Hogan and told anybody who would listen how much they hated Hulk Hogan, how Hulk Hogan wasn't a good worker, how Hulk Hogan couldn't wrestle, Hulk Hogan couldn't do anything that they could do. But he was selling tons of tickets, selling tons of fucking merchandise, and he was the man. He was doing something different. He had a talent that they didn't see, that they didn't attempt to, but they attempted to put it out. It was a fire they were trying to put out. MJF is saying right now that there is something out there that is bubbling. And a lot of these old head wrestling fans who are obsessive about The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin and constantly wanting to bring those guys back, that they're going to put that fire out. But he's going to be the one who's going to be able to stand above it all. You know? AEW is a good place for him to have that sort of mentality, because AEW doesn't have a history of bumping top guys off and replacing them with older talent because, hey, we have to do this match this one time or whatever the case may be. Again, Kevin Owens and Goldberg, right? Got to get the belt off Kevin Owens because we want to have Goldberg versus Roman. Not necessarily needed to have Goldberg versus Roman, but that was the plan. So you got to cough up that belt. You know? I get it. I understand it. So for me, I'm not on the MJF is wrong crowd. I am on the MJF is brutally honest. And he says things because he knows this is the attention getting business. That's what he knows. He knows if he says that you should just rot and die, that'll get everybody's attention. Because listening to somebody articulate why you might be wrong in your nostalgia, you're not trying to hear that. You don't really care about that. You just want to be validated. We want The Rock versus Roman Reigns with The Rock going over. Who gives a fuck if that means the titles are vacated because The Rock can't defend them? Who cares about the future and all that stuff? Because I tell you this, if The Rock wrestles that match and loses, nobody's going to say, well, that was the right decision, except the people who are okay with going on into the future. Only the people who are stuck in the past are going to look at this and say, The Rock should beat him. Because in their mind, that nostalgia is always the right way to go. It's not, though. All right. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.
MagMongoSlade. Best house I ever drew, Daddy.